The landlady turned out to be an overweight woman in an eye-catching red coat and a tangled chignon on top of her head. Her face, already not young and covered with a thick layer of powder, breathed bitchiness. Though when Zinaida Pavlovna opened her mouth, Dima realized that bitchiness was not limited to it. "Are you sure you have money, student?" she asked disdainfully. "I work after classes. I know your part-time jobs as a student. They pay you 2 pennies, and then you beg me for a rent deferment." Her left eyebrow arched upward in an arc of discontent. "The money for the apartment will be paid on time," Dima answered glumly. "Well, look at me." Zinaida was the first to step into the living room, loudly clacking her boot heels on the swollen wooden parquet. She circled the small room with her hand. Yes, it wasn't a royal palace, but it was close to the subway. Dima swallowed, and a panicky thought flashed in his head. Maybe it's not worth it? There was a sofa in the middle of an empty room and a heavy red carpet with some intricate plant pattern hanging on the wall. There was nothing else. Further inspection of the apartment did not reveal any pluses of this property either: rusty plumbing, mold on the chip tiles, and bone-chilling cold in all the rooms. But Dima could not afford anything else for his modest means, and he still had to agree to the available living space. Zinaida only stretched her plump lips in a crooked smile when she heard his answer. "No climbing on the mezzanine and under the bathroom. There's junk from past tenants and paint for repairs. Don't touch anything. Don't you ever steal anything from me. Did I make myself clear? Eh?" the landlady said threateningly, having already hidden the rent money somewhere under her bra strap and headed for the exit. Dima could only nod sluggishly, and in a minute the front door slammed shut, leaving him alone with the dusty carpet and the smell of dampness hanging in the air. If it weren't for the convenient location of this old dormitory and the relatively low rent, the guy would never have agreed to live in such a place. He wistfully remembered his hometown and his parents' house, where it was always dry, warm, and smelled of his mother's baked goods. But now he was grown up, earning his own money, and it was time for him to start his own life. What a pity that he started it in such a doghouse. Since then, Dima, every morning and evening, coming home, enjoyed a greasy stove, peeling wallpaper in all the rooms, and a small handful of cockroaches under the sink in the kitchen, which had obviously lived there for a long time and were not going to move anywhere. All attempts to clean the place only resulted in the dirt being smeared over a larger area, and the dust that had been kicked up from the place was constantly fluttering in the air. The first days, the guy was so tired at the university and at work that he fell on the creaky sofa and fell into a deep sleep until the alarm clock, trying not to pay attention to any imperfections of the apartment. But after a week, his schedule became more measured. He got used to a lot of things and slept much more sensitively. And one night, his sleep was disturbed by a measured sound. A drip, 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 drip. The annoying clatter of drops from the bathroom made Dima wake up and wiggle on the sofa. The old frame immediately creaked, making the guy cringe. Drip drop. Even through the thin blanket, Dima could hear every drop falling from the faucet to the bottom of the bathtub, as if a small hammer was tapping out its monotonous melody. The boy rose to his feet with a sudden movement and wandered into the hallway in the darkness, his hand barely touching the wall. The door to the bathroom was slightly ajar, smelling cool and damp. Flicking the switch, Dima stepped inside the tiny room, where an old cast-iron bathtub, an earthenware sink, and a toilet bowl barely fit. His feet were chilly from the icy tiles, and his whole body was instantly covered with goosebumps. It was as if the temperature in the bathroom was an order of magnitude lower than the rest of the apartment. The long faucet, with a slight patina of rust, shriveled and shabby, was turned towards the bathtub and counted drop by drop in a measured rhythm. Dima screwed the valves with all his might. The dripping became less, but the sound didn't seem to disappear. There was an unnerving pounding in my temples. Drip, drip, drip. The guy looked at the faucet with hatred. Condensation dripped from it, and a small puddle of rusty color formed on the floor. Having wiped it with a floor cloth, Dima turned the faucet to the sink and put a sponge under it, so that the knocking wouldn't disturb him to sleep, and then returned to the sofa. Already in the morning, sleepless and gloomy, taking a shower, he seriously thought about getting some more part-time work just to save money and as soon as possible to move out of this moldy and rusty stinking apartment. Pulling the curtain and stepping over the edge, Dima almost immediately noticed a huge reddish puddle, slowly and leisurely flowing from somewhere under the screen, which covered almost the entire space under the bathtub. The guy frowned and wiped up the water with a rag, but immediately new rusty rivulets ran along the tiles. Oh crap, there's something else leaking in here, he thought indignantly. Kneeling down, Dima felt the plastic screen, finding a small door. Through it, he could hardly see anything in the dark space under the cast-iron bathtub. The whole space was cluttered with junk. A basin filled with old packages of powders and various cleaning agents stood in front, a mountain of rotten rags behind it, rusted paint cans, stale brushes, and paint rollers. In the darkness, it was hard to see all the garbage, which, to all appearances, had been stored under the bathtub for years, growing red flakes of rust, dust, cobwebs, and fungus. Dima went to his room to get his phone, turned on the flashlight and, returning to the bathroom, looked once more into the center of stench and dampness. He could only fit one hand through the small window of the screen. He could barely move his hand because of the cramped space, and of course he couldn't even see the pipes, the drain, or the leak. Suddenly, a vague shadow flashed in the weak light of the flashlight near the paint cans, which immediately disappeared when Dima jerked sharply. A muffled rustling of fabric was heard, and in a couple of moments everything was silent again. The boy looked at the garbage for a few more minutes, trying to figure out if he had imagined it. But whoever lived under the bathtub clearly didn't want to be seen again. Rising to his feet and shaking off his knees, Dima quickly left the bathroom. He closed the door behind him especially tightly, and his fingers were already dialing his mother's number. "Hello?" "Yes." Heard in the receiver melodious mother's voice. "It's me." "Ah, son, you haven't called for a couple of days. Is everything all right? Have you settled in at the new place?" "Yeah, Mom." "Hey, can you tell me what kind of rat repellent you can use?" "Only effective." "Dima, have you got rats in your rented apartment?" Mom exclaimed in horror. "Rats or mice? I'm not sure exactly. Apparently, they were left by the previous tenants." "It's horrible. What kind of apartment is this in which rats live?" Mom breathed excitedly into the phone. "Did you talk to the landlady? This is just disgusting." "Ma," Dima raised his voice. "Calm down. Everything is normal." "What's normal here?" the mother started, but her son immediately interrupted her. "I don't have time. I have to be at school in half an hour. Just tell me some remedy to buy on the way." "Dima, I'm worried about you. I'm worried." "Ma, to business." The guy grumbled in a non-objectionable tone. Okay. We at the cottage with my grandmother did so. Took pumpkin seeds, inside with a syringe poured some liquid rat poison store, and then spread everywhere." "Why pumpkin seeds?" Dima was surprised. "Can't you just tell me the brand of poison? All these rodents love pumpkin seeds and smell them immediately. And since the odor is strong, the poison inside interrupts well. The rat grabs the seed, chews it without suspecting anything, and then dies after a while. And if you just put store poison everywhere, they will avoid it, that's all. These rats are very smart animals. They've known all the bad odors for a long time." "Did that idea of yours and your grandmother's ever work?" The boy doubted it. "Son, of course it did. We took out all the rats from the cottage. They avoided mousetraps, baits poisonous ignored, but against the seeds did not resist." "I got it. Thanks, Ma." Dima hung up the phone without even saying goodbye, hurriedly packed and hurried to class. And in the evening, after studying and working, he ran to the store and bought everything he needed to hunt for the rat that was under the bathtub. He did as his mother had told him, spread the poisonous seeds behind the screen, and threw a handful into the darkness where the pile of rags lay. Then he closed the door tightly again, so that the dying rat could not escape from its tiled dungeon. Near midnight, about to go to bed, Dima went to wash his face. He cautiously opened the door, fearing to see a rat corpse there, but the floor was empty. No rat, no seeds. The boy hummed smugly to himself, glad that his victim had taken his bait. Now all he had to do was wait for the poison to take effect. Although maybe the rat had long ago died and stayed somewhere in a mountain of rags under the bathtub. This thought made Dima tense up. He didn't want to smell a rat corpse decomposing somewhere behind the screen for a couple more weeks. But there was no way to get all the garbage out from under the bathtub to find the rodent, because the plastic screen could not be moved or removed in any way. There was only a tiny window through which anything larger than a can of paint could hardly get through. While Dima was washing his face, looking at the rust on the faucet and pipes, which, as it seemed to him, suddenly became a little more than it was last night, somewhere downstairs under the bathtub, there was a barely audible rustling. The boy tensed momentarily, frozen in place with toothbrush in hand, but the rustling didn't happen again. He hastily finished brushing his teeth and rinsed his face. Gotta take a look after all. Maybe I'll see the corpse of that rat, Dima thought, squatting down. But he did not even have time to stretch his hand to the window in the screen, as the light went out in the room. Quite silently, the bathroom plunged into thick, inky darkness. And in the next moment, the oilcloth curtain rustled, as if someone was climbing on it to the top, clinging to the slippery surface with many paws. Dima shrieked and scrambled out of the room into the corridor, staring in horror at the darkening gap in the doorway. He jumped to his feet and flicked the light switch, but it didn't work. As he continued to pull the lever in despair, he kept his eyes on the curtain, where something heavy was definitely sitting. It also froze as if lurking. Dima slammed the door out of harm's way, fearing that the creature might have left the bathroom. He stood motionless in the corridor for a long time, listening to all the sounds coming from the room. A slight rustle of the curtain, then a muffled thud against the surface of the bathtub, and then only the monotonous clatter of drops. Dima only at that moment realized that before that the faucet had not leaked at all the whole evening, and now suddenly in 1 second it started again. Drip, drip. Drip, 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 like a ticking metronome. Armed with a phone with a flashlight on and a knife from the kitchen, Dima used the tip of the blade to pry the frame of the switch near the bathroom and removed it from the wall. The bright light of the smartphone for a moment highlighted in the darkness a tangle of wires covered in a thick red layer of corrosion. Jesus, how is it that, with such wiring, this apartment hasn't burned down yet? Marveled the guy, not even risking to touch anything unnecessarily. It's a good thing the lights only went out, but there could have been a fire. Carefully returning the switch to its place, Dima went to bed. He had nothing else to do. He had to get up early in the morning to study. An electrician had to be invited to replace the rusty wires, and he didn't want to go back to the bathroom again before morning. He decided to wait until the rat's agony was over. Because the fearlessness of the dying beast, rushing at the curtain, scared him to the point of goosebumps. In the morning, when the alarm clock rang, Dima forgot about all his night fears and opened the bathroom door without the slightest trembling in his hands. But the dead rat was gone again, but everywhere he looked there were paths of rusty water. The floor was covered with red puddles and dried streaks. The curtains were streaked with a dark ochre color, and the bottom of the sink and bathtub were filled with thin flakes of rust. There were traces of it everywhere. A light film in the corner of the mirror, between the tiles, and even on the plastic screen. If this rat isn't made of metal, I have absolutely no idea what happened here overnight. A troubled thought flashed through Dima's mind. The heavy metallic odor in the air irritated his sense of smell. The dripping of water was heard under the bathtub, a barely perceptible sound, distant and frightening. And then, almost immediately, something jumped from below onto the cast-iron bathtub and ran along it, making a distinct rustling and even crackling sound. Dima's hair stood on end with horror, and he ran out of the room under the incessant crackling. Now, having slammed the door, The boy without delay put a chair against it, so that, God forbid, the creature inside did not want to get out. It did not become calmer at all, and Dima could not explain to himself the nature of that creature that ran on the cast iron and left its rusty trace, smelling of metal and dampness. It was definitely out of the question to make another visit to the bathroom or to fight the rat on his own. If it was a rat, Dima rather packed up and cowardly ran away from home for the whole day, only having time to notice that in the evening it would be good to call the Sanitary Epidemiological Service to agree on the extermination of the pests in his bathroom. No money could be spared for such a thing. He was morally prepared even to tear out the plastic screen himself, without fear of the landlady's anger, just to become the sole tenant of the old apartment again. At school, the boy was absent-minded. The whole day he spent as if in a bad dream, constantly mentally returning to what happened at home. Strange rust stains did not go out of his head. At work, he was not very attentive either, and his worried mother called him and asked him if his son had managed to get the rats out of the apartment. Dima mumbled something unintelligible about ineffective ways of fighting rodents with pumpkin seeds and hung up. He had no desire to explain to his impressionable mother what strange things were going on at night in the rented one-room apartment. When Dima tiredly piled into the apartment after work, the first thing that attracted his attention was an overturned chair lying on the floor in the hallway, the same chair that the guy had propped up the bathroom door in the morning. The bathroom door was wide open, and there was a puddle of rusty water on the floor in front of it. It was everywhere. On the walls, rusty chrysanthemums coming through the wallpaper. On the door, individual drops were fanning across the ceiling, and wet paths went not only into the kitchen, but also into the living room. Dima's fingers went cold. He could hardly believe his own story about rats, because rodents could not climb the ceiling and spread rust stains everywhere. He returned the chair to its place, propping it against the door. There was no particular assurance, though, that the rats weren't behind the couch or the kitchen cabinet. Dima didn't even look into the darkening hole of the bathroom. He felt in his gut that it was not worth it, as if from there, from the darkness and dampness, something could look back at him. Sitting down at the kitchen table and glancing nervously at the locked bathroom door, he quickly looked up the number of some pest control service on the internet and dialed it. There were long, monotonous beeps. Dima drummed his fingers on the table in excitement. To distract himself, he grabbed a handful of pumpkin seeds, which were in the bowl in front of him and had been left over from the beginning of the rat hunt, and started snapping them, popping them into his mouth one by one. "Hello, you've reached the Sanitary Epidemiologic Service. Your call is very important to us. Please wait for the operator to answer," said the mechanical voice on the other end of the phone. The seeds tasted strange, too bitter, and for some reason they tasted slightly of metal. "There are no operators available right now. Your call is third in line." Dima chewed a few more before his mouth went numb. Trying to cough and spit out the seeds, he realized uneasily that he could no longer feel his own throat. Fingers digging into his skin, the boy began to roll his eyes in horror. "What's going on? It's hard to breathe." His gaze dropped casually down to where a broken vial of rat poison peeked out from under a chair, a yellowish stain spreading across the floor. Nearby were open syringes whose needles were covered with a layer of rust. It had all been in a different place before and clearly had a more coherent appearance. "Your call is second in line." The phone fell out of Dima's stiffened fingers, and the guy slowly fell from the chair, roughly putting his shoulder on the floor. The poison spread quickly through his body, penetrating into his blood, making his muscles stiffen, and even his voice was no longer under Dima's control. "Your call is first in line." The chair that was propping up the door to the bathroom collapsed to the floor with a deafening clatter. The knob turned leisurely and the door opened slightly. Dima, writhing in agony, could see everything that was happening in the hallway. And when a dimensionless stain of rust grew on the doorknob in a flash and then swiftly moved down the surface of the door, the boy wanted to scream and shriek with horror. But no sound came out of his numb throat. The rust crept toward its immobilized victim, leaving a wet trail and thick red flakes that settled on all surfaces and immediately grew lush pockets of corrosion. The dark rust stains stretched in a wide strip along the corridor and came closer and closer to Dima's face, who was already losing his last vital forces. "Hello, my name is Valeria. How can I help you? Hello? Are you there? Call me back." Rust consumed everything, and everything became rust,